The sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Austin, Texas, as Hazel Patterson clutched the letter in her trembling hands, tears threatening to spill onto the yellowed paper. Her father had gambled away their ranch, their livelihood, and now, in a final desperate act to clear his debts, he had arranged to auction her off to the highest bidder at the upcoming county fair. It was 1875, and at 20 years old, Hazel had just learned she was worth exactly the sum of her father's outstanding loans. "You can't do this to me," Hazel whispered, her voice catching as she confronted her father in their modest kitchen. The once proud rancher wouldn't meet her eyes, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of his failures. "There ain't no other way, girl," Marcus Patterson muttered, taking a long swig from his whiskey bottle. "Either you go to whoever pays the most or we all lose everything. Your ma's too sick to survive being turned out, and your brothers are too young to fend for themselves." Hazel's mother, bedridden with consumption in the back room, didn't know what her husband had planned. The thought of her finding out made Hazel's stomach twist into knots. Her two younger brothers, just 12 and 14, were out doing chores, blissfully unaware their sister was about to be sold like cattle. "I'll find work in town," Hazel insisted. "I can sew, I can cook," her father slammed his fist down on the table. "It's already arranged. Judge Winters has approved it as a marriage contract auction to make it all legal-like. Half the men in the county will be there with their pocketbooks. Some are even coming from as far as San Antonio." His voice softened slightly. "If it makes you feel any better, girl, I made sure only men of means can participate. You'll have a fine house and never worry about going hungry again." Hazel backed away, disgust and betrayal burning in her chest. The walls of the small ranch house seemed to close in around her. "I am not some prize heifer to be sold at market." "No," her father agreed, his bloodshot eyes finally meeting hers. "You're the only thing of value this family has left." 2 days later, as the auction date approached, Hazel found herself at the creek that ran along the edge of their property. The water gurgled softly over smooth stones, indifferent to her plight. She'd been coming here since she was a child, finding solace in the consistent rhythm of nature when her father's drinking and gambling had begun tearing their family apart. "Thought I might find you here," came a deep voice from behind her. Hazel didn't need to turn to know who it was. "Hello, Heath," she said softly. Heath Evans, 25 years old and one of the few remaining cowboys who worked the Patterson ranch, stepped forward to stand beside her. Tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the Texas sky, Heath had been employed by her father since he was 17. He'd come from nothing, orphaned young and raised by various ranch hands across the territory before finding steady work with the Pattersons. "Word's spreading about what your pa's planning," he said quietly. Shame burned Hazel's cheeks. "Then you should go. I wouldn't want to tarnish your reputation by association," Heath snorted. "I don't give a damn about reputation, Hazel. I care about you." He knelt down, picked up a flat stone, and skipped it across the water. "It's not right what he's doing. Right doesn't factor into it anymore. He owes money to everyone from here to El Paso." Hazel hugged herself tightly. "The bank's taking the ranch at the end of the month unless those debts are paid." Heath turned to face her fully, his expression uncharacteristically intense. "I've been saving," he said. "Every penny I've earned these past 8 years. I was fixing to buy my own small spread someday." Hazel shook her head. "Heath, don't. I'm going to bid," he stated firmly. "Every cent I have. It won't be as much as what the banker or the saloon owner might offer, but I have to try." "And what then?" Hazel asked, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You'd be broke with a wife you never asked for and no means to support us." Heath stepped closer. "I wouldn't expect anything from you, Hazel. I'd set you free the moment the papers were signed. You could go east like you always talked about, maybe find work as a teacher or a seamstress." Hazel stared at him in disbelief. "You do that, spend all your savings just to let me go in a heartbeat," he replied without hesitation. Something shifted in Hazel's chest, a flutter of hope where only despair had lived for days, but reality quickly dampened it. "My father would never allow it. He knows you, he'd suspect your intentions." "Then I'll have to be clever about it," Heath said, determination hardening his features. The auction's 3 days from now. That gives us time to figure something out." For the first time since receiving her father's terrible news, Hazel felt a small smile form. "Us," Heath's expression softened. "Yes, us, I'm not letting you face this alone." That night, Hazel couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to her mother's labored breathing from the next room, contemplating Heath's offer. They'd known each other for years, worked alongside each other in the stables, shared meals during cattle drives when Hazel helped with the cooking. He'd always been kind, respectful, but she'd never considered that he might harbor deeper feelings for her. Did he? Or was this simply the act of a decent man who couldn't stand by and watch an injustice? Either way, she found herself clinging to the small ray of hope he'd offered. The next morning, Hazel went about her chores mechanically, drawing water from the well, feeding the chickens, preparing breakfast for her brothers. Her father had ridden into town early, likely to finalize arrangements for the auction and perhaps to drown his conscience in more whiskey. By midday, Hazel noticed Heath speaking with Tom Whitley, another ranch hand who'd been with the family for years. They stood near the corral, heads bent close together, occasionally glancing toward the house. When their conversation ended, Tom mounted his horse and rode off while Heath made his way to the barn. Curious, Hazel followed him. "What was that about?" she asked. Finding him sorting through saddle equipment, Heath looked up, seemingly unsurprised by her presence. "Tom's going to help us. He knows folks in Austin who might be sympathetic to your situation." "What good will sympathy do me now? It's not just sympathy we need," Heath explained. "It's allies, people who'll vouch for me when I bid, who'll help ensure your father can't back out once the deal is done." Hazel leaned against a wooden post. "And after, have you really thought this through, Heath? You'd lose everything," he shrugged, continuing his work. "Money comes and goes, some things are worth more." "Like what?" Heath paused, his hand stilling on the leather strap he was mending. "Like doing what's right, like making sure a person gets to choose their own path." There was something in his voice that made Hazel wonder if he was thinking of his own past orphaned and passed from ranch to ranch, his destiny never in his own hands. "I can't ask you to do this," she whispered. Heath finally looked up, his gaze steady. "You didn't ask, I offered. There's a difference." As the day of the auction dawned, Hazel felt sick with dread. Her father had insisted she wear her Sunday best, a pale blue dress that had belonged to her mother in better days, altered to fit Hazel's smaller frame. He'd even procured a pair of satin shoes from somewhere, probably on credit like everything else in their lives lately. "You look fine," Marcus Patterson declared, eyeing his daughter critically as she stood in the main room. "Might fetch a higher price if you'd smile a bit." Hazel remained stone-faced, refusing to give him the satisfaction. Her mother, who'd finally been told of the arrangement the previous evening, wept quietly in her bedroom, too weak to intervene but devastated by her husband's decision. Her brothers had been sent to stay with neighbors for the day, spared the indignity of watching their sister being auctioned off. "The wagon's ready," her father announced, adjusting his worn suit jacket. "Time to go." The county fairgrounds bustled with activity as they arrived. It was the annual spring gathering, a time when local farmers and ranchers displayed their crops and livestock, craftsmen sold their wares, and the townspeople enjoyed rare diversions from their hard-working lives. But today, whispers followed Hazel as her father led her through the crowds toward the main pavilion. Some faces showed pity, others curiosity, and some the men with money pouches visible at their belts showed a calculating interest that made her skin crawl. Judge Winters, a portly man with mutton chop sideburns, greeted them at the entrance to the pavilion. "Mr. Patterson, Miss Patterson," he nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Everything is prepared as requested. The proceedings will begin at noon." Hazel was directed to a small tent adjacent to the pavilion stage, instructed to wait there until called. Through the canvas, she could hear the growing murmur of the crowd as men gathered for the auction. A flap in the back of the tent rustled, and Hazel turned quickly, her heart racing. Heath slipped inside, looking uncharacteristically polished in a clean shirt and vest, his usually tousled brown hair slicked down. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered urgently. If my father sees you, your father's too busy greeting potential bidders, Heath assured her. I just needed to tell you everything's in place. Tom spoke with the newspaper editor and a few of the town council members. They don't approve of what's happening, but they'll make sure the auction itself is conducted legally. How does that help us? It ensures that whoever wins the bid has legal rights that even your father can't revoke afterward, Heath explained. If that person is me, and if it isn't, Hazel interrupted, voicing the fear that had plagued her. What if you're outbid, Heath? Some of these men have thousands to spend. Heath's confidence wavered for the first time. I have 8 years of savings. It's not a fortune, but it's something. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I'll do everything I can, Hazel, I promise. Before she could respond, a voice called from outside the tent. Miss Patterson. It's time. Heath quickly slipped back out the way he'd come, leaving Hazel alone to face what waited beyond the canvas walls. The auction stage had been set up with a wooden platform and a small podium. Judge Winters stood at the center, a sheaf of papers in his hands. To his left, Marcus Patterson waited, looking simultaneously proud and ashamed if such a combination were possible. To his right stood the town auctioneer, Elijah Brown, who normally presided over livestock and property sales. Hazel was led to a chair at the side of the stage, feeling the weight of dozens of stares as she took her seat. The crowd consisted mostly of men, some she recognized from town, others strangers who must have traveled upon hearing the news. In the back, she spotted Heath, standing with Tom Whitley and a few other sympathetic faces. Judge Winters cleared his throat. Gentlemen, we are gathered today for an unusual but legally binding proceeding. Mr. Marcus Patterson, being in considerable debt and facing the loss of his property, has arranged for his daughter, Miss Hazel Patterson, to enter into a marriage contract with whichever gentleman presents the highest bid. All debts owed by the Patterson family will be assumed by the winning bidder, in addition to the bid amount which will go directly to Mr. Patterson. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The minimum bid has been set at $500, the judge continued. All bids are final, and the winner must present payment immediately following the auction's conclusion. Hazel stared at her hands, folded tightly in her lap, refusing to look at the men who were about to bid on her future. Let us begin, Elijah Brown announced, taking over. Do I hear $500? 500, called a voice from the crowd. 600, came another bid almost immediately. Hazel's stomach churned as the numbers climbed rapidly. 650, 700, 800. Each increase represented another man willing to purchase her like property. $1,000, called a deep voice that made Hazel's head snap up. Gerald Tucker, the bank manager who held most of her father's notes, stood confidently near the front. He was a widower in his 40s, well established in town and known for his ruthless business practices. $1,000, the auctioneer repeated. Do I hear 1,100? 1,100, came a bid from James Mercer, the owner of the largest saloon in Austin. At least 50 and already on his third wife, Mercer's reputation with women was notorious. The bidding continued, climbing past 1,500, then 2,000. The crowd had thinned to just a handful of serious contenders. Hazel hadn't seen Heath bid yet, and she wondered if he was waiting or if he'd already been priced out. $2,500, Tucker announced, silencing the crowd. It was an enormous sum, enough to buy a decent-sized ranch outright. Hazel saw her father's eyes widen with greed and relief. $2,500, the auctioneer repeated. Going once. 3,000, called a voice from the back. The crowd parted, revealing Heath standing tall, his expression determined, Marcus Patterson's face contorted with anger. Evans, what do you think you're doing? Bidding, sir, Heath replied calmly. As is my right, the judge nodded. Mr. Evans is correct. Any man with the means to pay may participate. He doesn't have that kind of money, Patterson protested. He's just a cowhand. I have exactly $3,142, Heath announced clearly. Saved over 8 years of honest work. It's everything I own, and I'm placing it all as my bid for Miss Patterson's hand. Murmurs swept through the crowd. It was unheard of for a working cowboy to have amassed such savings. Tucker stepped forward. 3,200, he countered coldly. Heath's jaw tightened. He glanced at Hazel, then back at the auctioneer. $3,142, he repeated firmly. Plus my horse, saddle, and gear. Fair market value would put that near $3,500 total. Judge Winters consulted briefly with the auctioneer, then nodded. Personal property of demonstrable value may be included in the bid. The court recognizes Mr. Evans' offer as $3,500 equivalent. Tucker's face reddened. This is absurd. I won't be outbid by some saddle tramp with delusions of, "Do you wish to increase your bid, Mr. Tucker?" The judge interrupted. The banker hesitated, calculating. Finally, he shook his head. "No, the girl isn't worth $3,500. "Very well," the judge declared. "Going once, going twice. Sold to Mr. Heath Evans for $3,142 plus personal property of equivalent value." A stunned silence fell over the gathering. Hazel could hardly believe what had just happened. Heath had done it. He'd bid literally everything he owned in the world. Her father stormed across the stage. "I won't accept this. Evans is one of my own hands. He's doing this to spite me." "The auction was conducted legally, Mr. Patterson," Judge Winters stated firmly. "You've received a fair price, more than fair, I'd say. The contract will be signed immediately." As the judge guided them to a table where the documents waited, Heath finally approached Hazel. His eyes searched hers, concerned. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Hazel nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. Within minutes, the papers were signed and witnessed. Heath handed over every cent he possessed, along with the deed to his horse and equipment. In return, he received a marriage certificate bearing both their names and a document transferring all Patterson family debts to him. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Evans," Judge Winters announced, though his tone suggested he understood exactly what had just transpired. He leaned closer to Heath, speaking so only he and Hazel could hear. "What you've done today took extraordinary courage, son. I wish you both well." As they stepped down from the stage, Hazel's father blocked their path. His face was mottled with rage and embarrassment. "You think you're clever, don't you, boy?" he snarled at Heath. "Well, you've bought yourself a wife and a mountain of debt. Hope it was worth throwing away your future." Heath met his gaze steadily. "The only future I'm concerned about right now is Hazel's, sir, and yes, it's worth every penny." They walked away, leaving Marcus Patterson clutching his payment and his wounded pride. As they moved through the dispersing crowd, several townspeople nodded respectfully to Heath, and a few even offered quiet congratulations to Hazel. "What happens now?" Hazel asked when they'd reached the edge of the fairgrounds. Heath glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "We stick to the plan. We're legally married, but as I promised, I'm setting you free. I know you've always wanted to go east, maybe to St. Louis or even Chicago. There's enough in the payment your father received to buy you a train ticket and give you a start somewhere new." Hazel stared at him. "And what about you? You've given everything you have, your savings, your horse, even your saddle. What will you do?" Heath shrugged, trying to appear unconcerned. "I'll find work, always have. And the debts, my father's debts that are now legally yours, I'll figure something out," he said, though they both knew there was no easy solution. The combined debt would take years, perhaps decades, to repay on a cowhand's wages. Hazel felt tears prick her eyes for the first time that day. Not from fear or shame or anger, but from the overwhelming realization of what this man had done for her. He had sacrificed everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, with no expectation of return. "We should go back to the ranch," Heath said, interrupting her thoughts. "I'll help you pack whatever you want to take with you. The eastbound train leaves tomorrow morning." Hazel nodded silently, and they began the walk back to where Heath's no longer his horse was tethered. They would have to borrow a wagon to return to the Patterson ranch, now essentially owned by the bank with Heath responsible for the payments. As they walked, Hazel couldn't help but see Heath in a new light. She'd always known him as quiet, dependable, honest, but this selfless act revealed a depth of character she hadn't fully appreciated before. By the time they reached the ranch, word had spread ahead of them. Hazel's brothers ran out to meet them, confused and excited by the day's events. "Are you really married to Heath now?" 12-year-old Samuel asked, his eyes wide. "Is he going to live in the house with us?" 14-year-old Daniel added. Hazel exchanged a glance with Heath, uncertain how to explain the complicated truth to the boys. "Let's go inside," Heath suggested gently. "Your sisters had a long day." In the house, they found Hazel's mother sitting up in a chair in the main room, a rare occurrence given her illness. Her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a weak smile when they entered. "Heath," she said softly. "Tom Whitley rode ahead and told me what happened. I can never repay what you've done for my daughter." Heath shifted uncomfortably under her gratitude. "No need for repayment, Mrs. Patterson. I just did what needed doing." "And now," she asked, looking between them, "what are your plans?" Hazel hesitated, glancing at her brother's curious faces. "Perhaps we should discuss this later, Mother." But Elizabeth Patterson shook her head. "No more secrets in this family. We've had enough of those." She turned to her sons. "Boys, go fetch some water from the well. We all need some tea after today." Once the boys had gone, she continued. "Heath, Tom told me you intend to send Hazel east. Is that true?" Heath nodded. "Yes, madam, that was our agreement." "And you?" "You'll stay here, working to pay off Marcus's debts while my daughter builds a new life somewhere else." There was no judgment in her tone, only a thoughtful curiosity. "That's right," Heath confirmed. "It's what Hazel wants, what she's always wanted." Elizabeth turned to her daughter. "Is it? Is that still what you want, Hazel?" Hazel found herself unable to answer immediately. For years, she'd dreamed of escaping the confines of ranch life, of seeing the world beyond Texas. But now, faced with the reality of that freedom purchased at such a tremendous cost by someone else, she felt unexpectedly uncertain. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Everything's happened so fast." Her mother reached for her hand. "When your father told me what he'd arranged, I was heartbroken. I've been too weak to stand against him for too long." Her voice strengthened. "But I'm not too weak to offer counsel now. Heath has given you a precious gift choice. Don't rush to decide how to use it." The sound of the front door slamming interrupted their conversation. Marcus Patterson stumbled in, clearly having visited the saloon after the auction. He froze when he saw Heath sitting in his parlor. "What's he still doing here?" he demanded. Elizabeth straightened in her chair. "He's here because he's now legally married to your daughter, Marcus, and because he's assumed responsibility for all your debts." "Well, he can get out. Auction's over, payments made. I don't need to look at his face in my house." "It's not your house anymore," Heath pointed out quietly. "The bank owns it and I owe the payments. Technically, I have more right to be here than you do." Patterson's face purpled. "Why, you insolent." "That's enough, Marcus," Elizabeth interrupted with surprising authority. "Heath and Hazel have decisions to make about their future. You've done quite enough damage already." For perhaps the first time in years, Marcus Patterson seemed chastened by his wife's words. He muttered something unintelligible and retreated to the kitchen, where they heard him rummaging for another bottle. "You should rest, Mother," Hazel said gently, noticing the fatigue settling over the older woman's features. Elizabeth nodded. "Yes, I suppose I should, but promise me something, both of you." She looked between Hazel and Heath. "Promise you'll take at least a few days before making any final decisions. The train will still be running east next week." After helping her mother back to bed, Hazel found Heath outside on the porch, staring out at the land that had been his workplace for 8 years. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ranch, painting everything in hues of gold and amber. "I'm sorry about my father," she said, joining him at the railing. Heath shook his head. "No need to apologize. He's a proud man brought low by his own choices. That's a hard thing to face." "Still," Hazel insisted, "after what you did today." "I did it for you," Heath said simply, not to spite him. Hazel studied his profile, wondering how she'd worked alongside this man for years without really seeing him. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why would you give up everything you've worked for? And don't just say it was the right thing to do. There has to be more." Heath was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and reflective. "When I came to work here, I was 17. No family, no home, nothing but the clothes on my back and the skills I'd picked up on other ranches. Your father gave me a chance, and for that, I'll always be grateful." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "But it was you who made this place feel like somewhere I belonged. You were kind when you didn't have to be, treated me like a person when others saw just another hired hand." He turned to face her. Over the years, I watched you dream of leaving, of finding something better than this life. I respected that, still do. But I also saw what your father's gambling was doing to this family, to you, when I heard what he'd planned. Heath's hands tightened on the railing. I couldn't let that happen, not to you. But your savings, Hazel pressed. Your future, Heath's expression softened. Some things matter more than money, Hazel. Your happiness is one of them. His words hung in the air between them, charged with an emotion neither was quite ready to name. Before Hazel could respond, her brothers came bounding back with buckets of water, breaking the moment. That night, after a tense and mostly silent dinner, Heath insisted on sleeping in the bunkhouse with the other hands, despite his technical right to claim a place in the main house as Hazel's husband. The gesture reinforced to everyone that their marriage was one of convenience and rescue, not love or desire. Lying in her bed, Hazel stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. The train ticket east represented everything she'd thought she wanted: freedom, adventure, a chance to build a life of her own choosing. But the cost of that ticket suddenly seemed impossibly high. The next morning, Hazel rose early and found Heath already at work in the stables. The other ranch hands gave them curious glances but maintained a respectful distance. "I've been thinking," Hazel said without preamble. "I'm not taking the train tomorrow." Heath paused, a saddle in his hands. "You don't have to decide right away. Your mother's right, you should take some time." "It's not that," Hazel explained. "I've realized something. If I leave, all you've done is trade your future for mine. That's not freedom, it's just shifting the burden." Heath set the saddle down. "Hazel, I made that choice willingly." I know you don't expect anything," she interrupted. "That's what makes what you did so remarkable, but I can't just walk away and leave you drowning in my father's debts." "What are you suggesting?" Hazel took a deep breath. "I think we should make this marriage real." "Not right away," she added quickly, seeing surprise flash across his face. "But I'm proposing we really try to make a life together. We can work this ranch, make it profitable again." Heath studied her carefully. "You've always wanted to leave." "I won't have you staying out of obligation or gratitude." "It's not gratitude," Hazel insisted. "At least not only that, it's possibility." She stepped closer to him. "You've shown me something I didn't expect, Heath. That sometimes the most meaningful choices aren't about where we go, but who we stand beside." For the first time since she'd known him, Heath seemed at a loss for words. Finally, he said, "It won't be easy. Your father's debts are substantial. It might take years to turn things around if we ever can." "I know," Hazel acknowledged, "but I'm stronger than people give me credit for. We both are." A small smile tugged at Heath's lips. "That you are Hazel Patterson, excuse me, Hazel Evans." The name sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "So," she said, extending her hand formally. "Partners?" Heath looked at her offered hand, then back to her face. Slowly, he reached out and took it, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Partners," he agreed. Over the next few weeks, a new routine established itself at the ranch. Heath, now technically the man of the house, took over management of the day-to-day operations. Marcus Patterson, humbled by the turn of events, and perhaps secretly relieved to be free of responsibility, retreated to a secondary role, focusing primarily on training the horses, the one aspect of ranching he'd always excelled at when sober. Hazel, determined to contribute meaningfully to their shared future, took charge of the household accounts, discovering her father's bookkeeping had been even more disastrous than they'd realized. She also began selling her needlework in town, her fine stitching quickly earning a reputation among Austin's more prosperous ladies. Though legally married, Heath and Hazel maintained separate sleeping quarters. He took a small room off the kitchen that had once been a pantry, insisting Hazel keep her bedroom. They operated more as business partners than husband and wife, earning curious glances but also growing respect from neighbors and townspeople who'd witnessed the auction. Elizabeth Patterson's health, remarkably, began to improve with the reduced stress in the household. While still frail, she found enough strength to sit on the porch most days, offering advice and encouragement to her daughter and son-in-law. "You two work well together," she observed one evening as they reviewed the month's accounts at the kitchen table. Better than Marcus and I ever did. Hazel glanced up at Heath, who was frowning over a column of figures. Working together had revealed new dimensions to him: his patience with her brothers, his quiet intelligence, his unwavering determination. She'd begun to look forward to these evening sessions, their heads bent close together over the ledgers, occasionally brushing shoulders as they pointed out entries. "We're making progress," Heath acknowledged, responding to Elizabeth's comment. "Slowly, but it's something." "More than something," Hazel corrected, tapping the bottom line. "We've reduced the debt by nearly 15% in just 2 months." What she didn't add was how much of that progress came from Heath working from dawn until well after dusk, taking on extra jobs breaking horses for neighboring ranches, even helping with construction in town on Sundays when most men rested. One Saturday in late summer, Hazel rode into Austin to deliver some mending she'd completed for Mrs. Thornton, the mayor's wife. As she was leaving the Thornton residence, she encountered Gerald Tucker on the street. "Mrs. Evans," he greeted her coldly. "How fortunate to cross paths with you today." Something in his tone made Hazel instantly wary. "Mr. Tucker, good day to you." "I've just been reviewing your husband's payment schedule," Tucker continued, falling into step beside her. "He's been admirably consistent, I'll grant him that. But at the current rate, it will take nearly 12 years to clear the debt." "We're aware of the timeline," Hazel replied evenly, "and committed to meeting it." Tucker smiled thinly. "Yes, very admirable, though I can't help but wonder if you wouldn't have been better off had I won the auction. You'd be living in a fine house in town now with servants and new dresses. And a husband I didn't choose," Hazel added pointedly. "Choice is a luxury, Mrs. Evans, one your husband purchased at considerable cost." Tucker paused, his expression calculating. "I could make things easier for you both, you know, restructure the debt, perhaps extend more favorable terms." Hazel stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "In exchange for what, Mr. Tucker?" His eyes traveled over her figure in a way that made her skin crawl. "Just your friendship. Occasionally, when my house feels particularly empty." Rage flashed through Hazel so intensely it momentarily robbed her of speech. When she found her voice, it was steady and cold. "Mr. Tucker, I would sooner lose everything we own than entertain your proposal for even a moment. My husband purchased my freedom, not my virtue, and certainly not for your benefit." Tucker's face hardened. "Very well. Then perhaps I should review those payment terms again. I believe there's a clause regarding acceleration of the debt under certain circumstances." "You do that," Hazel replied, refusing to show fear. "And I'll be sure to mention this conversation to my husband, and Judge Winters, and Reverend Michaels, and every woman in your bank's sewing circle." The banker's confidence faltered. His reputation in town was important to his business, and such allegations, even if denied, would cause irreparable damage. "No need for unpleasantness," he muttered, backing down. "I was merely making conversation." "Good day, Mr. Tucker," Hazel said firmly, turning away and continuing toward her wagon, her heart pounding but her stride purposeful. That evening, Hazel debated whether to tell Heath about the encounter. She didn't want to burden him with one more worry, but they'd promised honesty between them as partners in this venture. She found him in the barn after dinner, mending tack by lantern light. Even after a full day's work, he couldn't allow himself rest if something needed fixing. "You're working too hard," she said softly, announcing her presence. Heath looked up, a tired smile crossing his features. "Says the woman I found sewing by candlelight at midnight last Tuesday." Hazel returned his smile, settling on a hay bale across from him. "Fair point. We're quite a pair, aren't we?" "That we are." Heath set aside the bridle he was repairing. "Something on your mind? You've had that look all through dinner." "What look?" "The one that says you're turning something over and over in your head." Hazel sighed, still amazed at how well he'd come to read her in such a short time. "I had an encounter with Tucker in town today." Heath's expression immediately darkened. "What kind of encounter?" She told him everything, watching his hands clench into fists as she described Tucker's proposition. When she finished, she expected anger, perhaps even a declaration that he'd confront the banker. Instead, Heath was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Hazel blinked in surprise. "Sorry for what?" that you had to face that our arrangement puts you in such positions." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "This isn't the life you deserve, Hazel. And what life do I deserve?" she asked. "One where I'm shipped off east with your money while you slave away for my father's debts. One where I'm sold to Tucker or Mercer and treated as property?" "No, of course not, but no buts," Hazel interrupted firmly. "I chose this life, Heath, after you gave me the freedom to choose anything, and I'm proud of what we're building together." Heath studied her face in the warm glow of the lantern light. "You're remarkable, you know that." Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. "So are you," she replied softly. For a moment, the air between them seemed charged with possibility. Then Heath cleared his throat and picked up the bridle again. "We should both get some rest. Early start tomorrow." As summer turned to fall, the ranch began to show signs of recovery. Under Heath's management, the remaining cattle herd grew healthier, fetching better prices at market. Hazel's sewing business expanded, with orders now coming from as far as San Antonio. Even Marcus Patterson contributed, staying surprisingly sober and focusing on training several promising colts that would bring good money when sold. But the strain of constant work began to take its toll, particularly on Heath. Hazel often found him asleep at the table, ledgers still open before him, or discovered he'd worked through the night mending fences or completing repairs that couldn't be done during daylight hours when other tasks took precedence. One evening in early November, a powerful storm swept across the ranch. Rain pounded the roof while lightning split the sky and thunder rattled the windows. Hazel paced anxiously near the door, watching for Heath, who had gone to secure the livestock hours earlier and had not returned. When he finally stumbled in, he was soaked to the bone and shivering violently. "Heath," Hazel rushed forward, helping him remove his dripping coat. "You're frozen through." H had to move the yearlings to higher ground, he managed through chattering teeth. "Creeks are rising fast." Hazel guided him to the chair closest to the fireplace. "Out of those wet clothes," she ordered, turning her back to give him privacy while she stoked the fire higher. "I'll fetch a blanket." By the time she returned with her thickest quilt, Heath had stripped to his long underwear, which was also damp but less sodden than his outer garments. She wrapped the quilt around his shoulders, then knelt before him to remove his boots and wet socks. "You'll catch your death," she scolded gently, rubbing his icy feet between her hands to restore circulation. Heath managed a weak smile through his shivers. "Wouldn't be very convenient for you if I did." "Don't joke about such things," Hazel said sharply, surprising herself with the vehemence of her reaction. The thought of Heath falling ill, perhaps seriously, struck a chord of fear she hadn't expected. Heath seemed equally surprised by her tone. His expression softened as he watched her ministrations. "I'm all right, Hazel, just cold and wet, nothing a fire and dry clothes won't fix." But by morning it was clear that wasn't true. Heath woke with a raging fever, a hacking cough, and breathing that rattled ominously in his chest. Hazel sent her youngest brother galloping for the doctor, while she and her mother worked to make Heath comfortable in his small room. "Pneumonia," Dr. Wilson declared grimly after examining Heath's chest with his stethoscope. "He's young and strong, which is in his favor, but this is serious, Mrs. Evans, very serious." Hazel felt the floor tilt beneath her. "What can we do?" "Keep him warm. Try to get fluids into him. There's a mustard plaster that might help ease his breathing." The doctor prepared a packet of powders. "Mix this with water for the fever. I'll return tomorrow, but—" He hesitated, glancing at the patient. "You should prepare yourself. These cases can turn quickly, especially when the patient is already exhausted." After the doctor left, Hazel refused to leave Heath's side. She applied the mustard plaster to his chest as directed, spooned broth between his cracked lips when he was conscious enough to swallow, and bathed his burning forehead with cool cloths when the fever raged highest. Through the night, his condition worsened. His breathing became more labored, and he began to mutter deliriously, calling out names Hazel didn't recognize, perhaps people from his orphaned childhood. "Don't leave me," she whispered, clutching his hand as his fever soared. "Please, Heath, fight." Sometime before dawn, he seemed to recognize her through the haze of fever. "Hazel," he rasped, "I'm here," she assured him, leaning closer. "I'm right here." He squeezed her hand weakly. "The payments, due Tuesday, don't let Tucker." "SHH," she soothed. "Don't worry about that now. Just focus on getting better." Heath's glazed eyes fixed on her face with surprising clarity. "Been thinking," he managed between labored breaths. "If I don't make it, don't," Hazel interrupted fiercely. "Don't you dare speak that way," but Heath persisted. "Listen, the insurance paper. In my trunk. It's not much, but it would clear about half what's left of the debt. You could sell the rest, maybe have enough to still go east." Tears spilled down Hazel's cheeks as she realized he'd been planning for this contingency, ensuring her freedom even in his absence. "I'm not going anywhere," she insisted. "Not without you, so you need to fight, Heath Evans. Fight with everything you have." For 3 days, Heath hovered between life and death. The doctor came and went, his expression growing increasingly grave. Hazel barely ate or slept, refusing to leave Heath's bedside except when her mother insisted on relieving her for short periods. On the fourth night, as a cold rain pattered against the window, Heath's fever finally broke. Hazel, dozing in a chair beside his bed, woke to find his eyes open and clear, watching her. "You look terrible," he whispered, his voice hoarse but stronger than it had been in days. A laugh that was half sob escaped her lips. "You're one to talk." Heath managed a small smile. "How long?" 4 days, Hazel answered, reaching for the water glass beside the bed. "You've been very ill." The doctor wasn't sure. She couldn't finish the sentence, the reality of how close she'd come to losing him suddenly overwhelming. As she helped him sip the water, her hand trembled. Heath caught it in his own once he'd drunk. "Hey," he said softly, "I'm still here." Hazel met his gaze, no longer able or willing to hide the depth of her feelings. "Yes, you are, and I need you to stay that way." Something shifted in Heath's eyes, a recognition, a dawning realization. "Hazel," he began, but was interrupted by a coughing fit that left him gasping for breath. "Rest," she urged, adjusting his pillows. "We have time to talk later." Heath's recovery was slow but steady. Within a week, he was able to sit up in bed and take solid food. By the second week, he could move to a chair by the window for short periods, though he tired easily, and the cough lingered stubbornly. During this time, Hazel took over full management of the ranch, surprising herself with her capability. She organized the hands, negotiated a sale of 3 horses Marcus had trained, and even rode out to inspect fences after a minor flood damaged the south pasture. "You're a natural," Heath observed one evening as she updated him on the day's business. "Better at this than I am, I think." Hazel smiled, pleased by his praise. "I had a good teacher these past months." They had fallen into a new routine, more intimate than before his illness. Each evening, Hazel would bring the ledgers to his room and they would work together until he grew tired. Sometimes they simply talked, sharing stories from their pasts or dreams for the future. Heath spoke of his childhood, fragments of memories from different ranches, kind hands and cruel ones, lessons learned through observation and necessity. Hazel shared her own history, her mother's genteel upbringing, her father's early promise as a rancher before the gambling took hold, her own education pieced together from her mother's teachings and borrowed books. "I used to dream of becoming a teacher," she confessed one night. "That's why I wanted to go east. There are normal schools there that train women properly." Heath considered this. "You'd be good at it. You're patient, smart." "Perhaps someday," Hazel replied thoughtfully, "but for now, this is where I need to be." As Heath regained his strength, a new tenderness developed between them. Hazel found herself lingering when their hands touched, and sometimes caught Heath watching her with an expression that made her heart flutter. By Christmas, Heath had recovered enough to join the family in the main room for dinner. Elizabeth Patterson had decorated the modest space with pine boughs and red ribbons, and even Marcus made an effort to be pleasant, having maintained his sobriety throughout Heath's illness. "A toast," Elizabeth suggested, raising her glass. "To family and to new beginnings." "To new beginnings," the others echoed, though Hazel noticed Heath's eyes remained fixed on her as he spoke the words. Later that evening, after her parents and brothers had retired, Hazel sat beside Heath near the fireplace, enjoying the peaceful glow of the Christmas candles. "I have something for you," Heath said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not much, but..." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Hazel found a delicate silver brooch shaped like a wildflower. "Heath," she breathed, running her finger over the intricate petals. "It's beautiful." "It reminded me of you," he explained. "Strong enough to bloom where planted, no matter the conditions." Hazel looked up at him, deeply touched. "But how did you win, did you? I asked Tom to pick it up in town last week, had a bit saved that Tucker didn't know about." Heath smiled sheepishly. "Probably should have put it toward the debt, but—" "No," Hazel said firmly, pinning the brooch to her dress. "This is perfect, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I have something for you too." She retrieved a package from behind a cushion and handed it to him. Heath unwrapped it carefully to reveal a finely crafted leather-bound journal. "You're always scribbling notes about the ranch on scraps of paper," Hazel explained. "I thought you might like something proper to keep them in." Heath ran his hand over the smooth cover, clearly moved by the gift. "This is too fine for ranch notes." "Nothing's too fine for you," Hazel said softly. Their eyes met across the small space between them, and something unspoken passed between them. Heath reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. "Hazel," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." She nodded, her pulse quickening. "Are you happy with this life with—" He hesitated. "With me?" Hazel didn't hesitate. "Yes," she answered simply. "More than I ever thought possible." Relief washed over Heath's features. "When I bid for you that day, I never expected. I thought I was just giving you a chance at the future you wanted." "You gave me more than that," Hazel said, moving closer to him on the settee. "You showed me possibilities I hadn't considered." "A different kind of freedom." Heath's hand gently cupped her cheek. "I've been falling in love with you since the first day I worked on this ranch," he confessed, his voice low and earnest. "But I never dared hope you might someday feel anything similar for me." Hazel turned her face to press a kiss into his palm. "I think perhaps I've loved you longer than I realized. It just took extraordinary circumstances for me to see it clearly." When their lips finally met, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, as if all the months of working side by side, of building trust and partnership, had been leading inevitably to this moment. That night, Heath moved from his small room off the kitchen to Hazel's bedroom. Their marriage, begun as an act of rescue and sacrifice, transformed into something real and profound, a true union of hearts as well as names. As the new year dawned, the ranch continued its slow but steady recovery. Heath, fully restored to health, worked with renewed vigor. Hazel, now genuinely embracing her role as Mrs. Evans, expanded her sewing business and began teaching reading to several neighboring children whose families couldn't afford to send them to the town school. In February, Marcus Patterson, in a moment of surprising clarity, approached Heath as they worked together in the stables. "I've been meaning to say something to you," he began awkwardly, "about what you did for my daughter." Heath continued brushing down the mare he was tending. "No need, sir." "There is a need," Marcus insisted. "I was wrong about a lot of things, but especially about you." He cleared his throat. "I've watched how you are with her, how you look at her. That's not the look of a man who married for show or spite." Heath finally met the older man's gaze. "No, sir." "It's not. You love her." It wasn't a question. "Very much," Heath confirmed. Marcus nodded slowly. "Good, she deserves that." He hesitated, then added, "I wasn't always the man you've known these past years. There was a time when I loved her mother that same way." "I believe that," Heath said quietly. "The gambling." Marcus shook his head. "It gets a hold of you, makes you forget what matters." He straightened his shoulders. "Anyway, I've decided to leave. Got an offer to work a horse ranch near San Antonio. It'll be better for everyone if I make a clean break." Heath considered this. "Have you told your family?" "Telling Elizabeth tonight. Thought I'd speak to you first, man to man." Marcus extended his hand. No hard feelings. After a moment's hesitation, Heath accepted the handshake. "None." Marcus Patterson left the following week. His departure, while emotionally complex for the family, further stabilized the ranch's finances. Without his gambling debts constantly accumulating, they could focus entirely on paying down the existing obligations. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. As the wildflowers blanketed the Texas hills, Hazel confirmed what she'd suspected for several weeks: she was expecting a child. Heath's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for. Joy, wonder, and a fierce protectiveness that made her love him even more. "A baby," he whispered, his hand gently resting on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." Hazel covered his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" Heath's eyes, bright with unshed tears, answered before his words could. "More than I ever thought possible," he said, echoing her Christmas Eve declaration. "You've given me a family, Hazel, something I never thought I'd have." As Hazel's pregnancy progressed, their determination to secure the ranch's future intensified. By combining Heath's skillful management with Hazel's financial acumen, they negotiated new terms with the bank now under different management after Tucker's improprieties with other clients had been discovered. By the time their son was born in early December, a healthy boy they named Henry, after Heath's long-forgotten father, they had reduced the debt to a manageable level that could be paid off within 3 years, rather than 12. On the day they brought Henry home from the doctor's house in town, a light snow dusted the ranch, rare for Central Texas, and considered a blessing by the old-timers. Elizabeth, overjoyed with her first grandchild, had prepared the house with all the warmth and comfort a new mother could desire. That evening, with their son sleeping peacefully in a cradle Heath had crafted himself, the new parents stood on the porch, watching the snow gently falling in the moonlight. "It's beautiful," Hazel murmured, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. Heath wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Not as beautiful as what's inside," he replied, nodding toward the house that held their sleeping son and Hazel's recovering mother. Hazel smiled up at him. "Do you ever think about that day, the auction?" "Sometimes," Heath admitted. "Mostly I think about how scared I was that I wouldn't have enough to outbid Tucker." "You bid everything you had," Hazel recalled softly. Heath pulled her closer. "Best investment I ever made." "You know," Hazel said thoughtfully, "when you told me you were setting me free, I never imagined freedom would look like this: a ranch, a husband, a child." "Regrets?" Heath asked, though the question held no real anxiety. They were long past such uncertainties. "Not one," Hazel assured him, turning in his arms to face him fully. "You didn't just set me free that day, Heath Evans. You showed me what love truly means: sacrifice, partnership, trust." She reached up to touch his face, still handsome but now bearing lines of responsibility and joy that hadn't been there a year earlier. "And you gave me the greatest gift of all." "What's that?" he asked, leaning into her touch. "The chance to love you back," Hazel whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him as the snow continued to fall around them, blanketing their world in quiet beauty. 5 years later, the Evans Ranch had transformed from a struggling operation burdened by debt to one of the most prosperous in the county. The original Patterson debts had been paid in full, and Heath and Hazel had expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land when it became available and diversifying into crops as well as cattle. Their family had grown as well. 3-year-old Hannah joined her brother Henry, filling the ranch house with laughter and energy. Elizabeth Patterson, though still frail, enjoyed her grandchildren immensely and had become a beloved fixture in the community, teaching piano to local children from her comfortable chair in the parlor. News occasionally reached them of Marcus Patterson. He had indeed found work at a horse ranch near San Antonio and, surprisingly, had maintained his sobriety. He sent gifts for the children on birthdays and Christmas, though he never visited. On the 5th anniversary of the auction, Heath and Hazel held a gathering at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came to celebrate what everyone now recognized as one of the greatest love stories in the county: how a cowboy with nothing but his savings had bid everything he owned to free a woman from bondage, only to win her heart in the process. As twilight settled over the celebration, Heath found Hazel standing alone near the creek where they had first discussed his plan to bid for her. The years had only enhanced her beauty, adding a quiet confidence that came from overcoming challenges and building something meaningful: remembering. He asked, coming to stand beside her. Hazel smiled. "Yes, it's hard to believe so much has changed in 5 years." Heath took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of a couple who had weathered storms together. "Some things haven't changed," he said. "Like what?" Like how my heart still speeds up when you walk into a room, he told her, his voice warm with sincerity. Like how I still think bidding everything I had that day was the best decision I ever made. Hazel leaned against him, content. Do you remember what you said to me that day after the auction? When I asked what would happen to you after you'd set me free, Heath nodded. I said I'd figure something out, always had. And look what we figured out together, Hazel said, gesturing toward their home where lanterns glowed in the gathering dusk, where their children played under the watchful eye of their grandmother, where friends and neighbors celebrated their shared journey. Something better than either of us imagined, Heath agreed. As they walked back toward the house, arm in arm, Hazel reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Her father's desperate gamble, Heath's selfless sacrifice, their mutual decision to face an uncertain future as partners all had converged to create a life rich with love, purpose, and belonging. You know, she said thoughtfully, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day, if you hadn't bid. Heath was quiet for a moment. I prefer not to think about that, he admitted. The idea of you forced into marriage with Tucker or Mercer. He shook his head. No, I couldn't have lived with myself if I hadn't tried. That's what makes you who you are, Hazel said softly, your willingness to risk everything for what's right. They had reached the edge of the gathering. Their son spotted them and came running, his little sister toddling determinedly behind him. Papa, Mama, Uncle Tom is telling the story about the big auction again, Henry announced, his eyes bright with excitement. Though only 5, he loved hearing the tale of how his father had won his mother's freedom. Heath scooped up his daughter while Hazel took their son's hand. Is he now? Heath asked with a smile. Well, we'd better go hear it, shouldn't we? As they rejoined their guests, Hazel glanced at her husband, still handsome in his prime, still the man who had risked everything for her. The love she felt in that moment was overwhelming, not just for what he had done, but for who they had become together, for the life they had built from what began as an act of rescue. Later that night, with their guests gone and their children sleeping peacefully, Hazel and Heath stood on the porch of their home, much as they had on the night they brought Henry home 5 years earlier. The stars spread across the Texas sky, brilliant and countless. I've been thinking, Heath said, his arm around Hazel's waist. That can be dangerous, she teased. He chuckled. Perhaps, but I've been thinking we should establish a fund. What kind of fund? Hazel asked curiously. For education. For young women who want to go east to those teaching schools you once dreamed of. Heath looked down at her. We could call it the Freedom Fund. Help other young women find their own paths. Tears pricked Hazel's eyes at the thoughtfulness of his suggestion. Heath Evans, she said, her voice thick with emotion, just when I think I couldn't possibly love you more, you prove me wrong. He smiled, drawing her closer. Well, Mrs. Evans, I aim to keep proving you wrong for the next 50 years at least. Is that a promise? She asked, tilting her face up to his. The surest promise I've ever made, Heath assured her, sealing his words with a kiss as the Texas night wrapped around them, stars witnessing a love that had begun with sacrifice and blossomed into something rare and precious, a love freely given, freely returned, and strong enough to transform not just their own lives, but the lives of others for generations to come.